We will touch base on like a few concepts which we did from last time, but please go through that video.
Yeah, I will go through tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's just give 5 more minutes. Actually, then even Raghav said he wanted to. So basically, what we did in the last class was we did a little bit of statistics in which we actually looked at what a random variable is. So how do we model distributions as random variables? So that was uh, one thing. So just to give you guys a gist until the class starts. So basically every event space can be modeled as a random variable or a random space. So anything, let's say for example, an event like if you throw a dice, right? The outcome of it is random. I mean, you can get like a value between 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we actually so when we apply machine learning to like event spaces and stuff like that, we actually consider whenever we're trying to uh, fit a model to a particular distribution or fit a model to a particular event space, we actually denote it by capital X, and that X is generally considered as a random variable. A random variable is something which denotes the outcome of random events. Like there are two kinds of random variables which why is it random? It's because every outcome which we get is basically not predetermined, but it has certain probability. That's why it's actually called a random. So what we looked at was two kinds of random variables. It's discrete variables and continuous variables. So in discrete variables are the ones which actually take discrete values. Like when you roll a die, the values which you get is like precise, right? 1, 2, 3, or 4 and 5. But let's say if I actually look at another another kind of random variables. Let's say if I actually am doing an experiment in which I look at the heights of different students in India or in the US. So now this becomes a continuous variable because you cannot precisely quantify them into like certain things because they can vary between 5.1 to 5 point like between 5 and 6, 5 foot and 6 foot. There are a lot of values which it can take, so we cannot actually discretize them. So I mean, if you go through a lecture, you will actually so we've taken a lot of examples to see how an event space, firstly, why is it random? Like whenever the outcome is not defined properly, and the outcome comes with a certain probability, it is actually considered a random variable. And then we classified the random variables into discrete random variables and continuous random variables. The reason we need to classify them as into these things is because that's how we calculate the mean and standard deviations of a random variable. For example, when you have when a basketball player shoots free throws, right? He's given, like, let's say if he typically has 3 throws, not every throw is actually going to be made. So in the 3 throws, he can shoot them. He can make 0 baskets, 1 basket, 2 baskets, and 3 baskets. So in this case, basically this is a random variable with a discrete random variable, but it's called random variable because every value which it takes is basically associated with certain probability of that particular value. So the reason we actually learn these probability distributions and stuff is because the main two parameters in statistics is mean and standard deviation. So in mean and standard deviation, the mean is also called as an expected value. So the way we define that is the probability of that event happening times the value which the random variable will take. Like for example, if I say what is the mean of outcome of the dice, right? What is the mean value which you are expected to get? What would that be? How would you calculate the mean of this space? Right, 1, 2, 3, and 5. If I ask you what is the mean value here, intuitively, how would you calculate the mean? Mean is nothing but the average, right? So generally what you do is you take every event and then you say 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 divided by the total number of events. So another way to look at that is by the definition which I said, probability of that particular event occurring times the value which that particular random variable will take. So what is the probability that one would occur? It is 1 by 6, right? So 1 times 1 by 6 plus 2 times 1 by 6 plus 3 times 1 by 6 plus 4 times 1 by 6. So intuitively, you would have already calculated the mean as the average of 1 to 6. But the way you look at the mean is by taking the value which the random variable would take times its probability. But in case of discrete values, you can directly do the sum like this, right? Because one value times this thing. But if it's a continuous value, like for example, the heights of human beings between 0 and 100 inches, right? So it is basically not possible to take every single value. So how would we actually calculate the mean of continuous random value? Any idea? First of all, is this clear? Like how you calculate the mean of discrete random variables? So one way to look at the mean of it, this is the event value occurring times its probability, and you take the sum of all such events. So that is the mean, because one does not always occur 100% of the time. It happens 1 by 6 of the time. 2 happens 1 by 6 of the time. 3 happens 1 by 6 of the time. So basically what we do is we take that particular value of the random variable times its probability and we sum it over all the values. But in case of like continuous variables, because we cannot go and like do it for every point, right? So any idea how we calculate the mean in such cases? Oh, actually, are you guys seeing my screen?
I'm not able to.
Okay, so maybe that's why you're not able to.
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I
So
just want to remind you to record the.
yeah, I've actually started recording it this
Oh,
time.
all right.
Thank
Okay.
you. So actually, I was just going through what we learned in the last class. Just this thing. So I guess like, what about others? Were you able to see my screen before?
No.
Oh, okay, so maybe this makes more sense because I was actually looking at this and explaining to you what discrete and random variables were. So I guess yeah, I was just talking about like the rolling of a dice and then how you take the mean and the standard deviation of that. So basically, when you roll a die, you have like 6 outcomes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the way we take the mean is the value of that particular random variable times its probability. But in case of like continuous random variables, like whenever the output is a certain value defined in a particular range, right? Like for example, the height of human beings, you cannot quantify them into like standard discrete values. You actually have a distribution. So whenever you have a distribution, you also have its probability. The probability is generally a normal density curve. So whenever like x takes certain values, for example in the height or anything, you basically have a certain probability associated with that each particular value. So in case of continuous random variables, the formula is still the same. So I said the formula was basically probable. So in case of discrete random variables, it is summation of x times the probability of x, right? In case of a dice, it would become like 1 times 1 by 6 plus 2 times 1 by 6, so on. But in case of a continuous random variable, we actually do an integral of it. So integral of again, it's the same thing. It is basically x times the probability of x dx. So basically we do the integral of this over all values of x. So like, let's say if I actually ask you what is the mean value of a particular random distribution, which is basically taking the values between x1 and x2. So you basically take x1 times its probability at x1, and then you integrate it from x1 to x2. So in general, integration is a concept I think we've learned in like high school again, which would basically cover the area under the graph, and then it is actually you integrate when you have increments which are really really small. So that's, I mean, we discussed a little bit on how such formulas came and stuff like that. So the main reason we actually looked at discrete and random variables were because we wanted to define what standard deviation and variance is for discrete and continuous values. So I think if you go through the lecture, I've explained how we calculate the variance and how we calculate the mean for each of the standards. So here, basically, x here represents that random variable, right? Whenever you are actually talking of the variance of a certain event, you represent it as capital X, variance of that. We've gone through this formula as to how you will get the formula, and in case of continuous random variables, what happens and how do you calculate. The main reason we did that was to explain the bias variance trade-off. So this was one of the main concepts, because I think even in the previous lectures, other than the last time, I had explained about overfitting and underfitting. So basically, what is bias, right? We basically use the term bias quite often in machine learning. Bias is basically the error you get when from the training data. So let's say if you have, so these are not two classes, it is the same class. I mean, it's uh, the same value, but I just wanted to show like the blue dots are the ones which we used for training, and the green dots are the ones which we use for testing. So let's say whenever we are doing a machine learning model, uh, what is the data we use? We use the training data, right? Because test data doesn't appear until the machine learns the curve or learns the model. We don't basically find the accuracy with the test data. So now looking at the two models, I think people who have attended last class, I think maybe like let the others answer this. So looking at the two models, which one do you think is a better model? So this is not, again, it's not a classification problem. It's basically a problem where you're learning the training data. So I think even in the last class, I've actually, or previous classes, I've actually shown you if the decision boundaries are really, really well drawn between different training sets, the difference, I mean, the disadvantage of that, right? But looking at this, which one do you think is a better model? Is it the first one or the second one?
The first one.
Why do you think is the first one is the better one?
Because it would classify, like when you test, when you have a new test data point, it would classify it better than the
Exactly.
other one.
So that is what this, so this is one important concept which they call as the bias variance trade-off. So firstly, I mean, don't get confused with the terms. Firstly, what is bias? Bias is the error which you get from training. So in the second case, your bias is almost zero, because you look at it from the training data, you're fitting the data really, really well, right? So your bias is almost tending towards zero. But when you learn it so well, do you think like your model will be that accurate? No, because the test data also has its own variance, right? It'll also be actually scattered across different points. So when you actually fit a model which is really, really close to what the training data is, this is actually called overfitting, or having a smaller bias. So when the bias seems to decrease, your so this is the graph which we looked at in the last class. The error in your terms, basically as your bias decreases, so you can see that the bias is decreasing. That means you're overfitting the data, but your error actually goes to an extent where it goes to a minimal point and then starts to increase, because if you start overfitting your data, when you put in your test points, your accuracy or your error rate is much higher. Look at the distance between this line, this section, and this section. It's really large. It's because you are trying to learn your training data really, really well. So that's why whenever the bias keeps on decreasing, we might think that, oh, we are learning the training data really well. In fact, there are some examples in which last class and previous class we did what is the training error and what is the test error. So we have training accuracy and test accuracy. So we don't care even if the training accuracy is 100%. What we care is the test accuracy, because test is the data which the machine doesn't see. So if you train to an extent where your training accuracy is 100%, you will definitely find that the test accuracy is basically higher. So there is some optimal point before which you need to stop training your data. So today we are going to learn decision trees, and I'm going to teach you like concepts like pruning and early stopping to actually avoid learning the data too well. So when the bias decreases, your initially your total error starts to decrease because you're trying to learn, but after some time you will see that the your test error or your total error keeps on increasing. Variance is basically so this is the other graph. Variance is a variance is the variance which you get from the test data. So as you can see here, as your variance, initially your variance will basically be low, because you'll start I mean it's not zero, but you will start with some particular fit, and then as you try to vary that particular fit, your variance will keep on increasing to an extent. So basically the terms bias and variance is nothing but a concept of underfitting and overfitting. So this portion of the curve is overfitting, this portion of the curve is underfitting. So you shouldn't basically underlearn your model, or you shouldn't basically overlearn your model. So there's always going to be an optimal point at which you need to stop. So that's what we saw in the last class. So this was the curve, and then the bias variance criteria told us that there is an optimal point at which you need to stop learning. And in order to, the reason we learned this is basically we did an algorithm called K nearest neighbors algorithm in the last class. So in the K nearest neighbors algorithm, we actually saw that generally when we test the data, we are just taking like 30% as test and 70% as training, right? So this is the thing which we use, the train test split in most of the cases. So in this case, there is still a bias because you are not actually using, so you have the whole data is 100%. You're randomly splitting 30% and 70%. So it could be that this 30% might have some information which your training is not been part of. So this is generally not a good way to test your algorithm, because this is random. Every time we run it, we'll get like randomly, we'll take some 30% of the data as training, as testing, and 70% of the data as training. So what we saw last time in the last class was another concept called as k-fold cross-validation. In k-fold cross-validation, what we do is we divide the data into like k number of chunks, and then we run the algorithm k number of times. Every time we test k minus 1 blocks, and then we train k minus 1 blocks and test one block. And let me just show you with the PPT here. So what we do is basically so it's called cross validation. In cross validation, we take the entire chunk and then we leave out the first bit, and then we train with this other bit, other parts of the code, and test this part, and then we run it again. In the second case, what we do is we actually test with the second chunk and train with the first, third, fourth, and fifth chunks. Third time when we run it, we actually test with 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, we train with 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, but test with the third chunk. So that way what happens is we actually get to every data gets to be part of both testing and training. So to get a much better accuracy, or to learn a much better model for your algorithm to know which one works better, so we always do k-fold validation, and ultimately the accuracy is the average of all of them. So once you take the average of all of them, that is your accuracy. Because I think in support vector machine also, whenever you run it, like when I ran it like multiple number of times, every time I run it, I'll get different results because this is splitting it randomly, right? So I think I was asking a question, did anyone get better results than me? I think Satya said he got like 100% in one case. But does it mean that his model is better than mine? No, that is because it could be that sometimes less variable data, more variance data could have been gone in his testing, and I wouldn't have got that data. So whenever I say that whose model is better, we generally do k-fold validation to validate that. Because sometimes we might overfit or underfit the data depending on what data comes in testing and what data comes in training. Is that clear? Like, so that's basically what we talked about last class. So if you actually watch that video, you will probably get a better understanding, but that's pretty much a small recap as to what we did. Any questions on that?
Anna, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So is k-fold validation used to train the data, or just to, once the model is actually made, to test the model?
So k-fold validation, so basically so as the name suggests, right, it's k-fold validation. So you still are at this point, you already decided what your parameters are. So you don't, so in case of like support vector machine, you decided what your hard margin is, you decided what your gamma value is and stuff like that. You won't change those parameters. K-fold validation is generally used to remove that bias coming from what data is gone for testing and what data is gone for training. So k-fold validation is mostly it predicts how good your model is. Like so once you actually fix your parameters, you train it. So in the validation, you also train. In this case, you're training with let's say you have like 100 samples, right? And then I say my k is 10. So you have each bucket contains 10 samples. So instead of doing a random split of 70 and 30, what we do is we do 90 and 10. The 90 comes from second bucket, third bucket, fourth bucket, fifth bucket, so on up to 10 buckets. We train with that, and then we validate the first 10. So this is one set of accuracy. Next, we run it again. We now train it with, so mind you, we are not changing the parameters across the runs. It's the same set of parameters, but now what we do is we train it with first bucket, third bucket, fourth bucket, so on up to 10. But now we test the second bucket. So like that, we continue with all 10 runs. So every time in each run you train, but you test with a different bucket. So that is the reason for that being, in case if the data, if there is some bias coming from your test or training data, that is avoided. So now you'll get an overall picture because every data is now part of testing and training. So once you get like the results of 10 runs, you take the average of the of the 10 runs. That is your actual accuracy. That's how good, because now your algorithm is independent of what data you gave it for testing and training. Is that clear? Like let me give you one more like such example. So in this case, let's say if I for example, let's say if for some reason, so this is how we are dividing the data between test and train, right? Let's say for some reason in one iteration you get all these points below this line, 1 2 3 4 5. If this comes for training, so now you won't learn the other section of the portion really well. So you will basically learn only this. That's why your test error might be really high. But in this case, what happens is, since we are doing it k-fold times, so we are running it k times with actually taking every bucket for testing also, your accuracy of your algorithm will basically be better. And then based on this accuracy, you can then go and fine tune your parameters again, and then rerun your k-fold analysis to get the best accuracy, because sometimes the only reason we are doing k-fold analysis is because we don't want to artificially say that our algorithm is accurate, because sometimes you might be lucky to get good data for training and good data for testing. So we don't want to introduce any bias because of that. Is that clear? Questions? Maher, is that clear, or do you still have any questions? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
okay.
Only thing is, I mean, I want to go through it again and
Yeah, just go through that again, because it might be because we spent like 2.5 hours on it, and I'm just trying to tell it in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Anna. Sorry, I went to go grab water.
Okay. Anyways, so just go through that. That's what we did in the last class, and then we did another algorithm called as k nearest neighbor algorithm. So that's pretty simple. It's not that complex. So basically, we just plot everything and take the nearest neighbors and do a voting mechanism, say which class it belongs to.
Okay, so then look over k nearest neighbors and code for k-fold validation.
Yeah, and then
Statistics stuff.
Yeah, and then go through the statistic stuff and understand the bias variance trade-off. It's a very standard question which people ask you.
Okay, what will the questions be formed as? Like, what's an example of a question we could get?
Like in case of generally in data science interviews, like they'll ask you what happens when you overfit the data.
Okay.
Like how do you actually avoid overfitting the data?
Sure. Okay.
So, and how do you know, like how do I accurately test it if there is overfitting? So then you say k-fold validation will actually
remove
will remove that bias. So
Okay.
today I think we've spent some time on this thing. So today we learn another algorithm called, we also did a revision of distance functions. We also did correlation and covariance vectors in the last class. So we saw what covariance between two variables is, and what a correlation coefficient is between two variables. So I think if it's not clear from the lecture, maybe we can do it. I mean, you can ask me questions in the next class, because I don't want to spend today's lecture explaining that. So, but we did a little bit of statistics and basically the function and basically the KNN algorithm in the last class. So today's class, basically what I wanted to show was, today we wanted to do a new algorithm called decision trees. How many of you heard of what decision trees is? It's also another, so most of the algorithms in machine learning are supervised. The reason being, it's always good to know the label of like how to classify each class. If you're doing unsupervised learning, it's only useful when you don't know the labels, and if the distribution actually is formed in like some groups, or there is some way for which the algorithm could actually come up with a way to segregate both classes and stuff like that. So in general, what we do is we use supervised learning whenever possible. So decision tree is another supervised learning algorithm. It's actually very easy to understand, but there are a lot of complexities in this thing. So then we'll talk about what decision trees are, and then we'll talk about how do we, so everyone understands like why overfitting is a problem, right? Overfitting will actually cause a lot of error in the test data, because you learn the model really well, which is very pertinent to training. So sometimes what we do is, in order not to overfit, we actually do some remedies to stop the algorithm from learning it too well. So it's good that the algorithm learns well, but we also stop it to an extent where it doesn't learn well. So we'll see how that is done using decision trees. It's called pruning. but we'll learn about it in the lecture. So decision tree is pretty simple. So what we do is, let's forget about this example, right? Let's say if I give you like Disney characters, or like or if you guys are DC Comics fans, let's say if I give you each character like Superman, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, and like Joker and stuff like that. Your job is to extract features from these people and come up with a way to say, looking at the character's costume, to say if that person is a hero or a villain. So what is the first step you will do? Like, there are different characters. So your job is to come up with an algorithm to segregate, if looking at the person's costume, whether he's a villain or a superhero. So what is the first step?
Maybe color.
So first step is you extract features, right? So without features, you can't do anything, right? So from the costume, so color of the costume is one feature. What are the main distinguishing factors between a villain and a superhero?
Appearance, right?
Appearance. So basically, looking at the appearance, you have to say, so let me give you the features actually. So one is the person wearing a mask or not, right? So mask is one feature. Second is the person having cape, like, cape, like Superman and Batman have capes. And the third one is basically, let's say, does he have any like the color of the costume? Is he having a disguise? Is he having some kind of a makeup and stuff? So basically, in your head, what what you're doing is, once you extract these features, so decision tree is somewhat very similar to how humans think. So generally what we saw so far is, we given a particular observation, first step what we do is we extract features. We did a lot of stuff in visualizing the features. We saw how how do we choose those features. We saw how PCA works and stuff. But for now, let's assume that we selected good features. But the very next thing what we do is, we take, let's say we have 5 features. The very next thing what we do is, we plot these features in a 5-dimensional plane. So when you plot them in a 5-dimensional plane, you basically will get, for each, like for all superheroes might be coming on one side of the plane, or maybe not, and all the bad people might be coming on another side of the plane. If it is not linearly separable, then we use SVM and use a kernel function to transform it into a higher dimension plane, to make it linearly separable and let the machine learn how to segregate the classes. But intuitively what we are doing is, let's say, forget about all SVMs and stuff, right? So let's say if I ask you the question, hey, if the person wears a cape, is he a good guy or a bad guy?
Good guy.
Good guy, right? Mostly like Superman wears a cape, Batman wears a cape. So technically what each feature is doing is, it's helping you understand it. At every feature level you're able to segregate, right? So first thing is he a good guy or a bad guy? You can actually just forget about other features. Forget about mask, forget about like whether he has a like the color of the attire. Let's just take one feature. Each feature will actually can segregate whether that person is good or bad. So first, let's say if I take the first feature and say cape, good or bad. So mostly cape, most of the time, 90% of the time, they are good. Now let's say I use the second feature. The second feature is basically mask or not. Generally, superheroes wear masks, right? So if a person is wearing a mask, then basically he's a good guy, or else he's a bad guy.
So Anna, for this decision tree, then every feature needs to just be binary then, right?
So every feature, in fact, if you look at any feature, it can be made binary, right? Like for example, in Indian liver patients, we actually have bilirubin content, we have alkaline phosphate content. I can come up with a value. Anything for which bilirubin content is greater than 1.2 is on one side of the data. less than 1.2 is on another side of the data.
Right, but wouldn't that come into the problem of overgeneralizing information?
It is not overgeneralizing it, because each feature is basically segregated into two classes. You again segregate them further, the next set of features.
Okay.
So exactly, you're right. You overlearn it if you actually take all the features, and ultimately when you come to the root nodes, you overlearn it. So that's where we'll talk of a concept called pruning. But bear with me for a second. You'll understand it once I go through examples and stuff. So basically, once you have some set of features, decision tree is an algorithm in which you will pick up one feature and then put everything which is satisfying that criteria, yes on one side, no on another side. Again, this yes, you again take next feature. So in case of like superheroes, we took cape, mask. Tell me one more feature. What else can it be? Superpowers, right? Like flying, or maybe Batman is rich, right? So maybe that's a superpower. I don't know. Like, so superpower or not is another kind of thing. But mind you, these features need not exactly divide them completely. There could be some, like for example, if you take a super villain, like even he can have superpowers. So it is not actually trying to divide it completely into one side, but you might have some exceptions on the other side also. But this is one way in which you can segregate them. So like in this example, let's say if I take height and weight of students, of people, and then I want to classify whether they are male or female. So this is generally I'm making this thing. Don't don't quote me on like this thing. Generally, if a height is greater than 180 centimeters, mostly like in the observations, if they are male, then you put them on this side. Female, then they are on the side. Generally, people who are tall also are weighing heavy, right? So what the decision tree is actually doing, it takes features and then divides them into two classes. Anyone who follows greater than this feature will fall on this side, less than this feature will fall on the other side. Then what we do is we take the next feature and then we again segregate them. We keep on segregating them until we finish all our features. So in a way, if you look at what always I told you, right, like you first plot them in an n-dimensional plane and then see how you can separate it. In a way, you're actually trying to do that separation here. Like if I'm taking a feature X and I'm coming up with a metric called alpha 1. So alpha 1, anything above alpha 1 is on this side of the plane. Below alpha 1 is on this side of the plane. X2 is another feature. Anything above alpha 1 is on this side of it. So I am also drawing these decision boundaries and I'm trying to teach the machine how to actually segregate them. But the limitation of this is basically you can only draw boundaries which are square, right? Anything above and below. So when you take the third feature, so you can actually draw something. So this decision trees will not work really well when the data is mixed up. That's why I actually said SVMs are really powerful, because it can actually take a data which is not separable and then clearly make a space, project it into another space where it's separable. But decision trees will work on the data classes where it is like this. So in this case, right, support vector machines are slightly expensive to train and stuff. In this case, you can see most of the red dots are on one side and then the blue dots are on the other side. So another example where decision trees will work really well. Any idea? Like we have gone through that in the last class also. Any image which comes to mind? Like in this case, so we've been looking at it for a really long time now. Indian liver patients, how we visualize it. In this case also, decision tree will come really well, because you can segregate this section of the code, this section of the features, right? Because you see most of it is cluttered here. So if I draw one line like this and another line like this, that is in a way, if you actually look at what we are doing, that's what we are doing here. We are trying to draw one line and say anything on this side of the line is class 1, anything on the other side of the line is class 2. Then once you come on this side of the line, you're again segregating that line further and saying anything below this is class 1, anything above this is class 2. So did you actually get an idea of what decision tree is actually doing?
Yeah.
So that's what the basic decision tree does. There are like there are a lot of other complications which we look into, but any questions on what a decision tree basically does? So a decision tree basically takes each feature and then tries to segregate the classes based on certain binary classification of the feature. So anything which is above, like in the case of the superhero example, cape, yes or no. Yes, then most of the superheroes fall under this thing. Then mask, yes or no, then most of the superheroes fall under this. So in a way, we are trying to draw these square boundaries in the feature space, which is actually classifying the data set into two or more categories. Is that clear? Now, okay, but any questions on this? Did everyone understand like what a decision tree is trying to do? It's basically a tree where you're deciding between both sides of the, I mean, where you're deciding on each side of the data.
Anna, I have a question on the trees.
Yeah.
So how do you know, for example, you gave the example of the Indian liver patients that like bilirubin count is at 1.2, like you just gave that example, but how does the machine know to pick that number 1.2 as the number to go left and right of?
So that's what we'll discuss in the next side of the,
Okay.
so that is, so exactly. So these are the complex, but initially you are just picking one value.
And then you say left or right, or yes or no.
And then you yes or no. And
Okay.
then what you do is basically, so that is one question. So that is one important question which I wanted you guys to think. Is there anything else, such any other problem which you see? One is deciding how do I know what is that 1.2 value, right? That's a good question. Any other thing which you see can be troublesome or is a little how would a decision tree actually start building? Like any other points which you feel is maybe impacting our decision tree building?
No, so I just want, I want to learn more about this.
No, I will tell you more, but so the thing is basically I want you to think about the problems too, and then when I give you the solution, it'll stick to your it'll stick in your memory really well. So okay, let me ask this question now. So how did I pick x1 first? Why can't I pick x2 first?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
Yeah, so because okay, when I'm actually trying to divide this into decision tree, you see that I've actually magically come and said, okay, I'll use x1 as my, why can't I use x2? I can use
So
x2 also, right?
did you do a PCA and find out x1 at the greatest variant?
Yeah, so yeah, that is a good guess. Because yes, if it has higher variance, so there is one method which will take the variance into account to actually get the thing. But you're right. So these are the things which are the main questions. So there are there are different types of decision trees. If you look at the decision tree, this thing is ID3 decision tree. There's a CART decision tree. There are like multiple decision trees. So it's not simple to actually come up with like some random. There is a process which we follow to actually say, hey, which is the feature which we need to divide, and which is the feature which we need to use first, which is the feature which we need to use next, and which is the feature which we need to use in the end. So now let us,
Anna,
yeah.
one more thing. So for a decision tree, can it only work if there are two categories? What if I had three categories? How will it create two boxes around it?
So if you have three categories, you will actually have a multi-level decision tree. So basically, so ultimately, so your decision tree is not based on categories, right? It is based on your features.
Yeah, it's based on features, but if I need to know one is a cat, one is a dog, and one is like a rat or something, then you have three different classifications, right? So then you need to create two boxes.
Then you need to create two boxes. But what we do in such a case is, so here is a overall overall division of a decision tree. What we do in such cases, let's say you have a cat, dog, and let's say a rat, right? And you have some features. You extract them at the end. So let's look at some terminology. So terminal node is the one which beyond which we won't split. So basically the terminology, root node is the first feature which we start with. Rest all of the features are called decision nodes based on which you split. Terminal node is the one where you actually stop splitting. So terminal nodes are also leaf nodes. So what happens is when you have multiple classes, we do a voting here. So let me show you an example which we will talk about, I think, later, like in car types, right? So let's say if you have like three classes, family car, sports car, and luxury car. So once you divide this category, you'll actually have some training samples falling in this split, right? And some training samples falling in this split. So for multi-class classification, you just take a voting of whichever is the maximum one which falls in this split. So let's say after I split it, let's say if, because you're dividing the training samples into these buckets, right? Let's say I found a split, for example, so like this is a car problem, like instead of the cat, dog, and
Mhm.
rat,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
have a family car, sports car, and this thing. So if I split on some features, I might get like 3 family cars here, 1 sports car in this split. I might get 8 sports car in the split, and I might get 7 luxury cars in the. So the maximum or the mode of each of the sample is where what you assign to your test database or test sample. So once you divide the splits, so you made the split, right? So now your test data comes. Your test data, you need to classify whether it belongs to class 1, class 2, or class 3. You follow the features of the test data, and ultimately in your terminal node, whichever one has the maximum number of features, you will assign it to that. So that's how that's how your splitting works. So remember, I actually told you one other thing. We'll talk about it a little later, but there is a problem of overlearning the data also, right? Because you are splitting it again, you're splitting it again, you're splitting it again. So if you use all the features, let's say you have a 3-class problem and I have 22 features. Somehow I extracted 22 features. I did PCA and came up with like the top 10 features. For 3 classes, 10 features are really too much. You might be learning to an extent where you won't, you will probably overfit the data. So there is a process called as pruning. So in pruning, what we do is we purposefully don't go beyond certain number of features. So what we'll say is I split on first feature, I split on second feature, third feature. I won't use other features. Now let me just stop over here. So that means it is not going to learn all the feature sets really well. So like it's like pruning is the term which we use even for like in gardening, right? We prune means we cut off the plant, right? So we cut it off beyond which we won't learn further. So that is one of the methods. So one of the questions they ask is like, how do you take care of overfitting? So in case of neural networks, we do early stopping, or we stop learning after a certain point. In case of decision trees, we do something called as pruning. In pruning, what we do is we don't consider all the features. We just stop at like second feature. And here you might have a lot of buckets. You might be left with a lot of nodes here, but that's still fine because you're still voting for what your thing is. So as long as you kind of find a classification where you have more number of nodes in your terminal of one particular class in your terminal node, you're good, right? You don't really care about. The problem comes when your terminal node contains equal number of training features from every class. That's when your voting will go crazy, because it's going to have like the same number of votes. So then you can't decide anything. Is that clear, or is any questions? Did everyone understand what pruning is? Pruning is the process where we stop learning after a certain level. It's called after certain depth, because if we keep on using every feature, we keep on building the depth of the thing, right? So pruning is one process where we actually stop learning because we feel that we might overfit the data.
How do we know when to stop the learning? Is it when we have 2 terminal nodes for a parent node?
So that's so there are metrics for that. So we will cover that in the later part of the code. So there are different methods. But before I go into those metrics, I want you to understand why those metrics came. So these are all good questions. Like, how do we know when to stop? How do we know which feature to use to split it? How do we know like what is the value we need to take? So these are all the questions based on which we have different kinds of decision tree algorithms. But if there are no, apart from these 3 questions, any other questions on decision tree? So if there are no further questions, I'm going to like go into like answering these things, but just to see what a decision tree is, one of the simplest algorithms, as you can see. It doesn't need any hyperparameters like in case of k nearest neighbors, we have k. In case of support vector machines, we need to decide on uh, what prune. It still uses like certain things like when you want to prune, we want to stop at some level and stuff, but it's kind of very easy to, it's also really fast to train it. It doesn't, because it doesn't require complex maths like projection into higher dimensional planes and stuff like that and this thing. So it's one of the relatively simple algorithms, easier to learn, can handle so non-linear classification also, right? Because the decision boundary is not linear here, it's square. So in linear classification means you have to draw one line to classify into two classes, but now I can draw like multiple lines, boxes and squares. So it's good for like non-linear classification results, and it's robust, high. I mean, these are all like standard this thing as to why we need to learn decision trees. But the other thing is like there are different ways of constructing these trees. So one of the popular examples are ID3, CART and stuff. So which we will discuss in the next slides. So most of the methods use something called as a greedy manner approach for splitting these trees. So before we go into that, okay. Now let's say we have a split, right? So let's say we have a split. In the first split, so there are two categories. Owner, like there's this. Let's say this is a decision node in which you have whether you own a car, yes and no. So let's say if you own a car, let's say you fall under maybe you're trying to classify if someone is a student or not, and maybe owning a car is one of the feature you have picked. So if you find that the class 0 and class 1, right, if you find that in the first split you have 6 people owning a car and 4 people not owning a car, sorry, 6 people are non-students and 4 people are students. In the other case, 4 people are non-students and 6 people are students. So what do you think is a better split? Like, how do you need to choose this feature such that depending on what your terminal node is, can you say something about how you can split? Like, should your split actually be such that both the terminal nodes have equal number of both the classes, or should they be as different as possible?
As different as possible.
That's right, because ultimately you want to find a feature such that using that feature you want to get all the class values here and all the other class values here. So in this case, this is not a good split. It's because this split, even though you're using this feature, it's still confusing. It's not giving you any value add, because 6 and 4 and 4 and 6 is not a good that means this particular feature is not a good metric to divide them into different classes. But look at the other ones. If you actually take a car and see which type of car they have, then you can actually say that if 8 of them of the one class come in one particular terminal node and 0 of the other class come in another one, so this is a better split. So this is what is called the homogeneity of the of your node. Homogeneity of the node means that if all the observations belong to one class after the split, then it's called a more homogeneous data set. If the observations belong to different classes, then it's called an impure data set or non-homogeneous data set. So the step number 1, we always actually try to come up with an algorithm such that the nodes will have homogeneous class distribution they are preferred. So like, for example, in this case, after the split, if you have 5 observations from class 0 and 5 observations from class 1, this is impure because they don't belong to one particular class, and also it's called homogeneous. So whereas if you do a split in which all of them belong to class 0 and other one belongs to class 1, it has a lower impurity and it's called homogeneous, this thing. But and you also understand, right, why? Because when you actually try to vote in the end, you don't want to have a you don't want to use a feature, so you want to have a perfect decision at the end of your tree. You don't want to leave it in the hanging like, oh, maybe it could be class 1 or class 2. So that's the reason we actually say that we split it to an extent where the terminal nodes are homogeneous and then they have low degree of impurity. So that is so this is what will determine which is the first feature you need to split on and what is the value you need to split on. So there are a couple of things which so we didn't talk about regression so far. We have only, most of the times we have talked about classification, because regression is the problem where we predict. So given the data, we learn the data, and for an unknown value we predict what the label is or y is, right? So we predict the actual value. So maybe we'll just stick to classification for now. So you can use decision trees also for regression. So in classification, it is pretty simple, right? A class is obtained by the terminal node in the training data is the mode of all the observations that fall in that region. If an unseen data or a test data falls in that region, then we make the prediction of that by giving it the mode value. The mode meaning whatever is the highest number of classes in that particular terminal node, we give it that particular value. So then we also use a top-down greedy. We do this recursively, right? So we basically then take so we traverse through the tree, go to next feature, and then we ultimately come up with such such a label such that it basically goes and finds the most homogeneous data.
Hi. What's up?
Let me mute him. Okay. So the other thing which we want to do is basically the idea of overfitting the data. So if the tree is like completely overfit, then which lead to poor accuracy, so then we use a method called as pruning. In pruning, what we do is we actually stop splitting that particular node further, because we don't want to overfit the data or overlearn each of the features. So that is one of the main thing. You can solve regression also using regression is basically so regression is basic. So what is the difference between classification and regression? So in classification, we predict the label, right? Label is a categorical value. It's either 0 or 1, or you classify them as 0 or 1. In regression is mainly a prediction problem. In prediction problem, you need to predict the exact value of what it is. Like for example, stock price, right? Let's say if you're predicting the stock price of one particular company, let's take Amazon, right? So you can't, it's not a problem where is it class 0 or class 1. You're given a problem, you're given the same homogeneous data of the price of the stock, and now I'm asking, hey, tomorrow what is the stock price going to be? So that is a regression problem or a prediction problem. So in such cases, how will decision trees help? So you can even solve such cases using decision trees. The only the way we actually do that is, instead of taking the label, what we do is we take the values of all the because in that case it's all going to be one value, right? Because it's the stock price prediction. So we'll take below 50, above 50, and then once you actually divide it and you get your leaf nodes, your leaf nodes will actually contain the exact stock prices. We just take the mean instead of the mode. There we took the maximum number of there we did a voting, right? So to find out the class label, here we'll just take the mean value of that particular value. So let's say if you actually split it using a decision tree, and then you get like 5 days in your terminal bucket, then when I want to predict what the value is, I'll just take each value and divide it and find the average value and give it back. Here we won't be using the label. Maybe when I talk about regression, we have a whole class on regression later, but just note that you can also solve regression using decision trees also.
Wait, Anna, just to clarify, instead of voting, we'll just take the mean of the leaf nodes and then return it back?
Yes. So instead of, so in case of classification, we don't care what the value of the observations there is, right? After you go through all those things, it's basically the class of the label what you care, because you want to classify whether the test observation belongs.
Yeah. Right, right.
So that's why you just take the mode of the class, like whichever has the highest class label, you just take it. In regression, you're trying to predict the problem.
Mm.
Right? You want an exact value. It's not,
Okay.
you're not trying to ask for a label, right?
Yeah.
So that's a prediction. So in such case, you take the whatever values of the training samples are there, you just take the mean of it and then return it back. So that's how you solve a regression problem. So remember, I actually told you like main machine learning problems are like type of learning is supervised and unsupervised, but again, there are like 4 main classes of machine learning problems. One is classification, which is like 80% of the problems are classification. Maybe 10% are regression or prediction problems. So this is basically where you predict what the actual price is. It's not a class label. So like, for example, if I give you the data of Amazon stock over the last 5 months, and I ask you to build a model and tell me what is the price going to be tomorrow, that's a prediction or a regression problem. In regression problem, you don't care about classes because all of them are of the same kind, right? Because everything is Amazon stock price. There is no class. So in such cases, you can build a regression tree also using decision trees, but instead of the class label, you will just take the average value of the uh, the exact value. You take the exact values and you take the mean of it and you send it back. We'll discuss regression problems later on when we actually do logistic and linear regression. So now coming to the questions, where to split? Splitting it into 2 or more subnodes. So we always try to split it into subnodes, which increases the homogeneity of the subnodes in terms of prediction. Decision tree splits the nodes on all available attributes and then selects the split that results in the most homogeneous subnodes. So this is what we actually even concluded ourselves, right? Like we want to split such that the subnodes are homogeneous in nature, meaning they are highly pure. They belong to the same class. Now, how do we determine that mathematically? So again, you can actually so here is the values, right? In binary decisions, we basically try to find values v such that this homogeneity is basically, so we do a search, uh, we take the distribution of that particular feature, we calculate its mean, and then we do a search from the mean. So mean plus 2 sigma, mean plus 3 sigma, whichever one will give you a higher homogeneity value, you will actually compute that particular value for the split as well. So first is you take the feature. So whichever feature will give you higher homogeneity split in the leaf nodes, and then we will take the value around which you'll split. So I think a better thing would be when we will do an example which will make it more clearer. So we can do multiple splits as you saw in the car case, right? Yes or no, or you can do like 3-way split. Like you can do family car, sports car, and luxury car. So there are multiple ways you split, but let us look at the problem first. So there are 3 main categories on which these trees are built, or like there are 4 of them. So first thing is called a Gini index. Then there is informational gain, chi-square, and a reduction in variance. So these are 4 methods, different methods based on which you build your decision tree. So let's look at what the first one. So Gini index, let us see. Gini index is a measure of the impurity. So it is basically, so Gini is basically the measure of impurity, but Gini index is 1 minus that. So you basically calculate the higher Gini score, you actually split your data on that particular feature. I'll tell you what the formula is. So formula for Gini is basically, it's probability of success squared plus probability of failure squared, but the Gini score is computed as a weighted Gini score for each node. So this will be clear when we take an example. Let me go to the example first. So by the way, like, is this clear? So basically Gini index is calculated as probability of, for each subnode, probability of success squared plus probability of failure squared. And then actual Gini score is computed as the weighted value of Gini score for each subnode. So this is a little complex to understand when I'm just telling it like this. Let us actually do it ourselves. So let's actually take an example. So we basically have a student population, and we have 2 features. One is basically their gender, and the other feature is their class. So here is 30 students. We need to come up with a decision tree which will actually classify to say whether given a student, and so that means given a test vector which will give you male and the class of the which class, 10th class or 11th 9th class, you have to predict whether he plays cricket or does not play cricket. So it's a classification problem. So basically we have 30 students, out of which 15 people play cricket, and the features which we have are gender. So we have 10 females and 20 males. And then the other feature which we have is basically the class of the student. So one is the gender, the other one is class. So 14 students in class 9 and 16 students in class 10. So now we have to determine whether we need to use gender to split first, or we have to use the class to split first. Is the problem clear? There are 30 students, out of which 15 people play cricket. So this is your training data. We give you all the information for the 30 students. We give you the features are basically their gender and then the class of study. So they're studying in class 9 or class 10, or whether they're male or female. So how do we, or which one do we take first? So first thing is we calculate the Gini index for that. Is the problem clear before I go into like how we calculate the Gini index? Our training data consists of 30 students. We have two features. One is the gender, another is the class. We need to build a decision tree using which we have to determine whether a test observation, a new student will play cricket or he will not play cricket. Any questions on the problem?
No question.
So now the question is basically there are two features, right? So how do we start, or what do we start with? Do we split on gender first, or do we split on the class first? So for that, we have to calculate the Gini index for the split. The Gini index is given by the formula. So the Gini score for a subnode is given by probability of success squared plus probability of failure squared. And the combined Gini score for each node is the weighted score. So let us look at what that means. So let's look at the first case. Let's say if I'm splitting on the gender, right? So now if I split on the gender, the number of students who are female are 10. Number of students who are male are 20. Out of 10 females, 2 play cricket, and out of 20 males, 13 play cricket. So what is the probability of success here? So let's just calculate for the female subnode. 20% of the people play, right? So probability is 0.2. So probability of success in this case is 0.2 squared. 0.2 times 0.2 plus probability of what is a failure? 1 minus 0.2, right? Because 8 people don't play cricket. So 0.8 times 0.8. So this is, remember the formula I told you, P squared plus Q squared. P is the success and Q is the failure. So P is 2 people play. So that's 0.2 times 0.2. And then 8 people don't play, 0.8 times 0.8. So the total value for the female, if we take female gender and then split it, is 0.68. Now let's calculate the Gini for the male. In the male index, success case, 13 people play. So 0.6 times 0.65 times 0.6 plus 1 minus that. So 7 people don't play, right? So that is 0.35 times 0.35. So that is 0.55. But what is the actual Gini score? This is Gini for male, female subnode is this. Gini for male subnode is this. The Gini score is the weighted average. So 10 people out of 30 people times 0.68 plus 20 people out of 30 people times 0.55. So you get a Gini score of 0.59 in this case. Any questions on how I got this Gini score? So first, I'm assuming that I'm splitting on gender. And then when I split on gender, I take for each subnode, I calculate the P squared times Q squared. So P squared here is 0.2 times 0.2 plus the failure, right? So 2 people play and 8 people don't play. So 0.2 times 0.2 plus 0.8 times 0.8, you get this value. And the Gini score for the male is 0.65 times 0.65 plus 0.35 times 0.35. So you get 0.55. But this is basically for each individual. But if I split on gender, the combined Gini score for that is the weighted weighted average of these two scores. Weighted average meaning 0.68, but how much of it is contributed? 10 females are there, right? So 10 by 30 of equals 10 by 30 times this score plus 20 by 30 times male score. So it is coming to 0.59. So this is how I got the Gini score if I split on gender. Now, you calculate the Gini score. I mean, don't look at this. I mean, I already have it there. But so if I split on the class, there are 14 students. Now, not the gender. In 14 students, class 10 has 16 students. Class 9 has 14 students. In class 9, only 6 people play. In class 10, 9 people play. So now if I split it on the class, what is the Gini score for class 9? So 6 divided by by 14, which is 0.43 times 0.43 plus 8 divided by 14, which is 0.57 times 0.57. You get 0.51. And then you actually do the same score for the 10th class, which is 0.5 squared plus 0.44 squared, because 9 by 16 and 7 by 16 squared. If you add both of them, you get By the way, you don't need to do all that. The algorithm, when you call the package, it will do that behind the scenes for you, but it is good to understand how it does it. So this is the score for each 10th class and the 9th class. But what is the average score for this thing? So you just take 14 by 30 times 0.51 plus 16 by 30 times. So it's the weighted average of the Gini score. So now you see the Gini score for splitting it on the class is 0.51, but the Gini score for splitting it on the gender is 0.59. So this is basically so the Gini index is basically impurity, but the Gini score is 1 minus that. So basically, the higher the Gini score, you need to choose that particular value. So 0.59 is greater than 0.51. So first we split it on the gender, and then we split it on the class. So in the above score, we split it on gender is higher than the split for the class. So first node which we split is the gender node. So this is one way we classify. So then there is another method so there are 4 methods, right? Actually, I think Deepika was mentioning about variance too. That is also another method. So that's the last method. But this one calculates the impurity index. So the Gini, is everyone clear with how Gini index is calculated and how using Gini we do the split?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I think before I go into the next one, let us do a small. Let us code with the Gini. So this one I want you to write in the class, because I don't want you to write it at home, because this is relative. It's like 5 lines of code. For the code is pretty much simple, because once you actually understand what the decision tree is doing, it's pretty much one line. So this is the entropy value, but let us use Gini value. In the Gini value, it's pretty much one line. So the line is decision tree classifier. You basically give the criteria. So one criteria is Gini criteria. The other criteria, I have 2 examples here. The other criteria is I use entropy, which is the information gain, which is the next one which I'll talk about. But let us quickly code this. So what we do in this case is, so I'm taking the Indian liver patients only. In Indian liver patients, we actually have the data which we have cleansed, right? So in the previous classes, we saw that we've removed all the NaN values, all the values which were missing and stuff. So we actually created a CSV called cleansed. I don't know how many of you. Does everyone have that, or do I need to send that data? I think we did the whole exercise as to how we cleanse the data. So let me just walk you through the steps here. So all we do is basically we do sklearn has this thing called as decision tree classifier. So, and then we use model selection for training and test split, because we need to split the data somehow, right? Like we can do k-fold validation later on, but for now we'll just use basic split. So all we will do here is we will basically separate the data. So we will use so so y is the label in the data, right? So the 10th column is basically the label, but we will use the column 0 to 10, which is these are the features. So what we will do in this case is we will take the data, we will split it again using the test size is 30. So 30% is the test data, 70% is the training data, and then we actually say give a random state which will tell you like pick it up randomly, and then we create a criteria for fitting the model, in which we say decision tree classifier. The criteria is Gini. We give a maximum depth. So this is what pruning does. So I don't want to use more. I don't want to go more than 3 features in depth. So so that what it'll do is it'll just do up to like 3 features, and then it'll stop. And we can, and then we can also stop at minimum samples. At least I should have 5 samples in the leaf node. So the leaf node is the terminal node, right? So we actually give like 5 samples in that leaf node. So then we create a decision tree classifier. We say fit it with the training data and test. So first we get the training and test data from the test train split, and we put the train here and test here, train here and test here. So you first learn it on the training data. So you fit the Gini classifier on the training data, and then what we do is we predict for the training data and we predict for the test data as well. So it's pretty much like 4 or 5 lines of code, and then we print out this thing. So I'll talk about this thing a little later. So basically, let me just run this, right? So if we run this, you will get that confusion matrix. So in confusion matrix, we saw that it'll tell you like how many of them are classified correctly and how many of them are not classified correctly. If I run this, so the accuracy which we are getting with this particular split using Gini is 65% accurate. So the training accuracy is 75%, but the test accuracy is 65%. So we know that the training accuracy, if it goes to 100, then it means that we are overfitting. So now this is fine. Training accuracy is 75%. That means it's not over learning the data. And we print out the confusion matrix in each case. Everyone know what confusion matrix is?
Yes, sir.
Confusion matrix we did the last time. So what we did there was class 1 and class 2, and how many of them are predicted as class 1, how many of them predicted as class 2. So generally the diagonal elements are the ones which are classified correctly. So so this is what I did with this particular data. I actually split them into test and train, and then I found out the test accuracy and the training accuracy. So in the training accuracy, it's not overfitting it because it's only learning up to 75% accurate. And then I printed out the confusion matrix for both of them. There is one other cool, because a lot of people get confused as to where to split and how it has split, right? So there is this website called webgraphics.com. So what you do is, so let me just go to that website. So this website is actually going to tell you, so if I go to this website, so this website will ask you for a digraph. The digraph is what you can print out by saying this tree function here will export a graph of which is the output of this particular learner. Let me just show you how it looks. So if you just open and then save this particular digraph, this is a function in the tree classifier. So it looks like this. So once you write it, it'll tell you how it has split every node and what its Gini index values were and stuff like that. So let me just paste that thing here. This is what I got from my output, and then I say generate graph. So here you will see, so I said maximum up to 3 depths, and I need a minimum of 5 samples in every node. So you can see that the first one which it picked was the third feature, and it split it on 1.25, and the entropy value was this. Where is the Gini index value? Did I generate it for? Oh, sorry. This is for the entropy. This is next case. This is the Gini index case. Control A. Just copy all of this thing. Entropy is something I'll talk about next, but I just want to show you this really cool thing which will actually tell you how it is split, because most of the time we won't know how it's split, right? So see, for this Gini index F, it took a value of 0.85. It took the third feature first. The Gini index value of what it was, number of samples it took, and how it got divided into two categories, true and false on this value. And then it does the next step, which is basically takes the fifth one here and the second feature here. Again, it takes the fifth feature and then sixth feature here. So this is how it determines which values to choose and then which features to choose. And mind you, this is only depth 3 because 1, 2, and 3. That's because I specified it here, saying that the depth of this feature is basically should not exceed more than 3. Remember the features which I gave here? The criteria is Gini, and then the maximum depth is this. The maximum depth I've given is 3. And the minimum leaf samples are 5. Like I need a split such that there are at least 5 samples, because totally I think there are 400 observations in our Indian liver patients. So my criteria is use Gini index to split it, use a depth of 3, and use a minimum leaf sample of 5 to actually create this model. I fit. So this pattern you should now, by now you should be familiar with this pattern. First, what we do, first we take the data, we put all the labels. The 10th column in the data were all the labels. We put the labels in Y, all the features we put in X, and then we give this particular function called train test split, which we have been using, which we used even for support vector machine, which we used even for k-means, we used even for KNN. So this is a standard thing. What it does is it takes the data, it randomly gives 30% of the data to test and 70% of the data to train. So X train and Y train, Y train is the labels of the Y, X train is the label as the features of X. It gives it to that, and then we fit the model. We create the model, we fit the model. All sklearn libraries behave the same manner. So you first create the data, you create your model, and you fit the model. And after you fit the model, you predict it on both train data and test data. The reason I predicted on the training data is because I don't need to, but I wanted to see if I overfit my problem or not. If I feel that the accuracy, training accuracy is over 90%, then I'll go and change the depth parameter to maybe like 2. I mean, that's why I gave 3, but if you give the depth parameter to 5, you will see that your training accuracy will increase more. So we don't want to increase the training accuracy because of overfitting. And then I printed out the confusion matrix to show you the results of how the data has been calculated. And then I output this file. So the tree function here, whichever the tree which we actually imported here, right, sklearn.tree, it'll actually output a file. You can copy that, you can write that particular text file with whatever your model, your Gini index has learned. And once you actually learn that file, you can go to this particular website, which I actually showed you here. And then you can paste that and it'll generate the graph for you. This will tell you which sample it has taken, what it is, how it has actually divided, and what was the Gini index for each sample. And it'll tell you like how much depth it went, and what how the graph has been generated, how your confusion matrix is, and what is your overall accuracy. Your training accuracy is 75, but your test accuracy is 61%. So this is for Gini index. I've written the same code for even entropy. So there are 4 methods, right? I'll go through the next methods. So let me ask you this question. Do you want to like write this code now? So that, or do you want to do it as homework?
Can we write it now? Just to see.
Yeah. The question is, how do we know what is the maximum depth we can input without overfitting the data? So maximum depth you can input is equal to the number of features in your code. So basically you split 1, right? You split 1, you get 2 subnodes. So each subnode, again, you can split it further. So 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus, so so it is 2 power 0 plus 2 power 1 plus 2 power 2 plus 2 power 3. That should equal your number of features, because it cannot exceed more than the number of features what you have. So basically you can, using that, you can calculate how much is your depth you should have. Like if you look at this graph here, so one feature splits into two features. This will again split into two. So it's 2 power 0 plus 2 power 1 plus 2 power 2 plus 2 power 3. So this particular thing, if you know there are 10 features, if you look at this, it actually uses fifth feature to split it further and further. So you'll get a vague idea. If you have like 10 features, like your depth should be around 2. If you have like 200 features, then you can go with a further like a more reasonable depth. But around 70% of the feature depth, if you actually use it up, then I think you're in the ballpark range. So these are all hit and trial methods. There's no hard and fast rule to say that stop learning after this, because you never know. Like we don't understand completely as to how the Gini like the values are computed, right? So that's why we do a lot of iterations and stuff. We give different depth levels, we give different this thing, and then we calculate the test accuracy and find out the value and stuff. Does that answer your question? I think the question was basically, how do we know what depth level should we stop? Okay. So should I, so I'll give you the choice right now. Should I continue with the other metrics as to how decision trees are going to be divided, or do you want to just once code this? Because I feel like most of the code you've been doing by yourself. So now I want to like sit and walk you through, or let us write this code once, so that you have an idea as to like first what we are doing. First we are creating the data, and then we are actually dividing them into test and train samples. So once we have the test and train samples, we create a classifier, and then we train the classifier. We fit that data with the train, and then we predict it on both. Ideally, we don't need to predict on the training data. We have to just predict on the test data. But just so that we find that it's not overfitting, I predicted it on the training data as well. And then we print out the training. It's just 4 or 5 lines of code. So if you please write it.
You'll send this to us, right?
I'll send this to you anyways.
Okay.
So you can, but then I kind of think you'll get into the habit of just running my code and not writing it yourself, because that the whole point of learning Python was to write the code yourself. So yeah, so why don't I do this? Why don't I give you like 50, because it's just few lines. Like I'll give you like 15 minutes to write the code, and then I can proceed with the next sections. Like Gini index is one, the other one is entropy, and then we have like the variance, and then we have chi squared. So there are 4 different ways you can create your decision trees. The idea is to basically create all 4 and tell me which one is the best for this particular model. But the main thing which I want to drill down is, first we need to clean the data. So these are the steps. So if you look at here, I'm using the cleansed data. We've created this cleansed data in the first and second class, where we removed all the missing values, we removed all the nan values and stuff, right? So we first clean the data, and then we get what is X and what is Y. X is the features, Y is the label. If you look at the cleansed data, the last column is the label. So we actually put the last column, all the rows, 10th column as in the label Y, and then all the features in X. So once we actually have features and labels, then we split the data using the train test split. This is coming from sklearn model selection. So this is the standard model. Like every time we use a machine learning model, first thing we need to do is get the data, split the data into test and train, create your model, either decision tree or a support vector machine or whatever model you want to create, and understand the parameters you're passing into the model. So in this case, I'm using Gini index, but so this is the main criteria. Rest of them are like, you can get it by hit and trial, but you need to understand like which index. The other example I have is, I have the same example, but I used entropy. which is nothing but the information gain thing in the slide. So it's pretty much the same. Then you create your model, fit the model, then predict your model on. So while prediction, what do you predict? You give it the new tests. So this is training, but then you actually, I even predicted it on the test. So you give the features of the test, because the reason why we are predicting on the test is because this is what we get. But in order to compute the accuracy, we need to know what the actual labels were, right? So that's why we actually take it from the same data. And this data has labels. The test data, ideally, in real world scenarios, you won't know what your test data labels are. You will just rely on what the machine tells you. But in order to ensure that your accuracy is good, we actually compare the labels which the machine learning algorithm has computed, and we compare it with the real labels so that we know the accuracy. So in the accuracy, the best way to actually show the results is in the form of confusion matrix. Confusion matrix is nothing but it has all. So in general, confusion matrix has, so let's say we have two classes. We have class 0, class 1. These are your columns, and then your so these are your rows, and the columns also have class 0 and class 1. So what this tells you is all the labels which are 0, how many of them have you actually correctly predicted? So let's say if it says like 15, and then let's say this is like 5. That means class label true ones, there are 20 of them, but you have predicted 15 correctly and 5 are wrong. Class 1, how many of them you have classified them as 0? Let's say if this is 2, and then this is, let's say 10. So generally the diagonal elements in the confusion matrix will tell you how many are correct, because class 0 should be predicted as class 0, class 1 should be predicted as class 1. So the diagonal elements will tell you what the correct accuracy is, and the other ones are basically not the right one. So that's why we use a confusion matrix to print it out. So how many of you are actually coding it now? Deepika, are you writing it now?
Yeah, I am writing. Can you
Okay.
give me 5 minutes?
No, take your time. It's like I just wanted to know if someone is writing it, or else I'm just staring at my screen. So I've actually written comments also for everything. So first step is get the data. Second step is segregate them into X and Y. X is all the features, Y is the labels of the features. And then you separate them into test data, and mind you, the results might be different because we are actually giving a random. So we are saying that, hey, do a random toss of like 100 times and then give us this, give us these results. So if you don't want it random, if you want it in the same sequential order, you can say random state 0. That means it'll give you like the same sequential order. But if you give like random, then it'll do like 100 runs and it'll pick one of them and give it to you. This is basically randomly you pick the test and train data. Ideally, this should be replaced with k-fold validation in case of if you're overfitting the data. And then you create your classifier. In case of SVM, you create a SVM classifier or decision tree classifier. You create the classifier with all the parameters. Then you fit the data to the training, and then you predict the data. So this is again, maybe I'll just delete the train. We don't need the train. It's prediction should always be done on the test data. And then just to so that you understand that we are not overfitting the data, I'm actually giving it on the train as well. What does the 0 to 10 mean? That means that so if you look at let me open this CSV file, maybe that will be more clear. So if you look at the CSV file, the 0 to 10 means the 0 and 9 columns are the ones which are the feature set. So I want all the features, which is basically from the 0th column to the 9th column. And then the last column is basically the labels. So that's why 0 to 10 means all the features from 0 to 10. So we'll give that thing to the algorithm and say, for all these features, try to build a decision tree. So let me look at C Python. I'll open the file so it'll be a little bit more clear. Training data sets. I have like a lot of data sets here. Indian liver patients. Cleansed. So this is the data I'm reading into. So if you look at this, the last column is basically the labels, 1 and 2, right? One does not have the disease, 2 has the disease, but the columns from 0 to 9 these are all the features. This is the age, this is the gender, this is bilirubin count, alkaline phosphate, blah blah blah, like different counts and everything. So all I'm saying is all this set is my features. So that is my X, and this is my Y. So that's why I have from 0 to 10 is my features. That's why it is X. And only 10, which is basically the 10th column, I actually have it as labels. By the end of the class, this whole routine of like how you write models, you should basically it should be on your fingertips. So get the data, create the data set, create the test and train vectors, create your model, fit the model, predict the model, report results. So this is like 5 standard things which we do. The whole theory or everything goes into what should you provide and how should you create your model. What are the parameters you can vary here? Like what are the criteria on which you create this model and stuff? So that is what this section. If you look at even support vector machines and stuff, it's also the same model. So because everything is pretty much same, right? You get the data, you train the data, and then you create your model. Once you create the model, basically what is the machine actually learning? It's learning the decision boundaries, the boundaries for the classes, and anything which falls beyond those boundaries is what you actually is what the machine learns. It learns a decision boundary. Anything which falls on the other side of the boundary, it'll say it's class 1, or this side of the boundary, it'll say it's class 0. So that is pretty much. So next class we will learn neural networks. So and I'll talk a little bit about deep learning and stuff. So with that, I think we will conclude. And there's one more algorithm called naive Bayes. So with that, I'll actually conclude like classification problems, like all these algorithms for classification. Then we'll look at and we'll start learning R, and then we'll look at logistic regression and linear regression, and we'll do those case studies in R. So that we'll even touch the R machine learning libraries and how to use them and stuff.
Sai, so I got the values for testing accuracy and training accuracy. How do you write the Gini.3 or whatever.
How do you output it?
Yeah.
Oh, you already got the accuracy. Okay. So what we do is, so basically, you take the tree and you say export it into graphic widths. So there is a function in the tree.
Okay.
You created a tree, right?
Uh,
So the tree is what you imported, right? Here, sklearn tree.
yeah, correct.
So that tree actually, so you pass in your model. So this is your model, right? This is the model which contains how it has learned everything. So once you've finished your model, you will say that export it into graph widths, and then you actually, so this is the line. Basically, you write it into a file. So I wrote it into a text file.
Okay.
So I opened a text file under write, and I said Gini decision tree dot text, and I outputted it into this file.
Okay.
So and then there is so there is this website here called www.webgraphicwidths.com. If you go there and then so once I run it, you will see a file here. You see there's a Gini decision tree.txt. So you just have to copy the contents of that. Copy the whole file, and then you go into this, you paste it here and say generate graph. It'll generate. So they'll give you a much better idea as to what it has done, because most of the algorithms, right, like you won't understand, like though we understood the theory, but what is the prediction value, which features is it actually using, and stuff is not really understood properly. So using this web bits graph, you can go and take a look at it. Are you getting a better training accuracy? Or so the reason I'm printing out the training accuracy is because of the fact that I want to see if I'm overfitting the data or not. That's the only reason, because there is no point in predicting on the training again.
Yeah.
Generally this is a useless step, but I'm generally doing it just to show that you know, if we are overfitting the data, like if you have like 95%, if it is fitting, then you go and say, hey, change my depth, or change the number of sample leaves, or stuff like that. So
I'm getting better testing accuracy.
yeah, that's good, because
Because it's just random, right? So
because it's random. So that's why you should use k-fold, right? So now you can't, so both of us wrote the same algorithm, right? Same parameters. So now you see that you got a better test accuracy. So now you generally it's very easy to get confused and say, hey, my algorithm is better than yours, maybe my computer does something better. But it's not that. It's basically this thing: test train split. Sometimes you might get good test results and train results in your algorithm, so you might get a better result, but it's not because of because algorithm is the same. So what we need to do is, instead of doing test train split, we should do a k-fold validation. You should take the data and then divide it into like 10 chunks, and then purposefully give the last 20 to 100 as training and 1 to 10 as testing. Sorry, maybe you can divide into 5 chunks also, like 20, 20, 20. So instead of, even in this, instead of this 30, instead of random, you can just take first 30, middle 30, and or like things like that. So basically you ensure that everything is part of testing and training.
or we could even increase the depth or something to just keep that accuracy.
uh, Increase the depth, yeah, to increase the accuracy, yes. I mean, but if both of us have the same data, no, the
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
I'm telling, now both of us have same parameters,
True.
right? So now if both of them are writing the same model, the only reason it's different is because the training data is different. But if both of us take the same data for training and testing, then both of us should get the same results.
Yeah, true.
Who else is writing the code? Like I know Deepika, you're writing it, but is anyone else?
Yeah, I'm writing it.
Okay, so I would encourage everyone to write the code also, because understanding the algorithm is like, I would say 90%, but the other 10% is also to write them. And that's why I'm sending my code also, in case in the future, if you just want to, like, let's say you're at a job and you want to, like, start training models and stuff, you can use them as benchmarks to start training. That's why every algorithm, but the only thing is, right, like if I spend more time in, because I already have the code, right, if I spend more time in you guys writing the code, then I don't think the time would be sufficient to explain it properly. But in some cases like this, where if the code, in fact, from now on, the code is relatively very simple. So you can just use this template. You can, all you need to do is change this line. Instead of Gini decision tree, you'll use SVM, or else you'll use neural network, or you'll use like multi-layer perceptron, or you'll use KNN, or you'll use K-mean. So it's, this model is the same. It's just the algorithm which you plug in is a little different. So you were asking this, right? So let me maybe just put this in the chat window. I'll send the code anyways, so don't worry. So should we go ahead and look at the other algorithms, other decision trees? Or do you still want some more time?
I'm done with it.
Okay. Meher or Satya, who was like some?
Yeah, I also was writing it. I think I'm done too.
Okay.
Our goal is just to output that Genie decision tree.txt file, right?
No, output that, and also like so this is just for your visualization to
Yeah.
understand how it is, but the goal is to like play around with these parameters, change
Oh,
the
okay.
criteria, change
Okay.
the depth level, change the number of samples, change.
Right. Did you teach us maybe in the last class, because I wasn't there, I missed it, but did you teach us how to validate using Kfold?
Yes, it was there in the lecture, but I didn't write the code for it, because the code is pretty much instead of this, you just take the data. What you do is you just, I think I have it in one more code. You just take the data, and then the number of rows which you use is you basically rotate that index. So you divide the number of rows into like 10 chunks, and then you just take the index 1 to wherever the 10th chunk ends, right? First bucket, you use it for, you just have to use that X train and Y train.
Okay, would you be able, like, when you send us this code, maybe in the comments show us like to use Kfold, like you have to like uncomment this code or something?
Okay, I'll try to do that when I send that, because it's pretty much like for loops, right?
Right.
So all this is in the for loop,
Mhm.
but what you pass into the X train and Y train, and what you do is you just take the accuracy and then keep on adding that accuracy for all 10-fold buckets, and you take the average of it.
Okay.
So that's pretty much what, and that will give you like a better, so instead of randomly generating this test train split, so you will generate like 1 to 10 is this. So the idea is you want to make everything part of your test and train at some point in your algorithm.
Right.
So
Yes.
that
Okay.
this thing. All right. So let me actually. I'll send this code also, but I think if you have a fair enough idea of like what Gini index does, let us look at the other popular thing which people generally use is information gain. So Gini index is one popular method. Other popular method is information gain or entropy. So information gain is nothing but 1 minus entropy. So so it's just inverse of it. So we need to choose the one with lesser entropy and higher information gain. So lesser than entropy is the noise in the data. So in general, if you look at the scientific definition of what entropy is the energy created by, I think, molecules in chemistry. I mean, it's been long since I read chemistry, but I think that's what entropy is, right? So the more the noise, the more the entropy in the system. So that's why you want higher information gain. It's 1 minus entropy. So basically information gain is it's again everything boils down to the purity index, right? So there are different ways. Gini index is one way to calculate the purity. The chi-square is another way to calculate it. Variance is another way to calculate it. But the most popular decision trees which are built either on Gini index or on information gain. So if you look at the image, C will actually require less. So it requires less information as all the values are similar. On the other hand, B requires more information and A requires the maximum information to explain what is happening. So it's in a way C is pure and B is less pure and A is most impure. It's the same thing as homogeneity as what we talked. The formula for entropy is you first calculate the entropy for the parent and then you calculate the entropy for each individual node and then you make a decision to whether to split based on that particular feature or not. It's kind of very similar to what we did in Gini index. So the formula for entropy is negative summation of the probability times log of that probability. So let's again take an example to look at what we are doing. So let's take the same example of the class students. So we had 15 students who play cricket out of 30. So your parent node was what? So 15 people in the class. So 15 divided by 30. And always remember the logarithm is whenever we mention logarithm in data science, it's log 2. It's not log 10, log to the base 2. So because we actually do binary trees and stuff, right? So even when you guys are calculating the order of equations, every time it's log 2, not log 10. So entropy of the parent node is 15 divided by 30 log 2 times 15 divided by 30 for its summation over all classes. So in this case, maybe it's a little confusing because 15 and 15 is the same class. So you see it twice, but first 15 is playing cricket, other 15 is not playing cricket. Entropy is 1. That means higher the entropy, it is impure because it has both classes information lined up. So now when you divide it based on the gender, the entropy 2 by 10, which is the probability of it, log times the probability of this, and the negative, the opposite of it, right? 0.72 for female node, and for male node is 0.93. So the entropy of the total gender split is the weighted entropy of each subnodes, which is 10 by 30 times this thing plus 20 by 30 times the entropy, so 0.86. But if you actually split it with the class wise, you see that the entropy is 0.99. We want lesser entropy because information gain is 1 minus that, right? So 1 minus 0.9 is 0.01 and 1 minus this is 0.48. So we want higher information gain and lower entropy. So you can see that if you split it on the gender, you have the lowest entropy in both the cases. So that's why we split on the gender of it. And then the next method is, as you pointed out, Deepika, is reduction in variance. So you basically, once you calculate, so basically for every node, you calculate the variance, and then you want to split it such that the criteria is you have to have lower variance after you split. Because after you split, you want the data to be homogeneous. You don't want too much variance in the data. So if you intuitively look at it, all of them are kind of measuring the impurity of the corresponding child nodes after the split happens. So Similarly, like when you calculate the variance, variance is nothing but you first calculate the mean. Mean of two classes, 1 and 0, is 15 times 1 plus 15 times 0 divided by 30. So mean is half. And then variance is, I think we've seen in the last class, right? Squared of, I think if you missed how to calculate the variance, just go through the last class lecture. So you basically calculate the variance of the parent node, calculate the variance of the female node and male node. Similarly, calculate the variance of, so you need not do all that, like the algorithm will do it. I'm just giving you an example so that you understand how it works. And you can see that if you actually split it on the gender, you have lower variance compared to the parent. So that's another thing. So there are different kinds of trees which actually are generated using different nodes. So the cart tree is the one which we use for Gini index, and one more other algorithm is the chi squared. So most of the time, most popular ones I saw are Gini and information gain. Some of them use chi squared also, but this is just informational thing. So chi squared is an algorithm used to find the statistical significance between the differences of subnodes and variance. So what they do is sum of squared of standard deviations of the observed and the expected frequencies. So again, let's take an example to look at it. So the formula for chi squared is actual minus expected is again the mean. They have a different formula to calculate it. So actual minus mean squared divided by expected squared. So this is actually called the tree which is created using chi squared is called Chiad tree. The tree which is created using Gini is called, I think, cart tree. Like the names are mandatory. Whatever you pass in into that algorithm is what you get. So using this formula again here, if we calculate, so again you can calculate the probabilities here. You can calculate the chi squared values for like the people playing. So if you expected is basically 5 because you have 10 people there, so mean is 5. So 2 minus 5 is minus 3, and then not playing cricket is 5 minus 3. And then you use the formula of expected minus actual minus this thing by square root of that. You will see that for the gender split, you have a higher chi squared value. I think I calculated that. Yeah, total chi squared for gender split, and then total chi squared for the class split. You can see clearly that the gender split is like way higher, 0.48, and this is class split is 1.46. So these are different parameters basically we use for creating decision trees and stuff like that. So if you have written the code for this, it's very easy to flip it. You just take this Gini index and just convert it into entropy. If you've written the code, just change this from Gini to entropy, and then you will find the accuracy for entropy and this thing also. I've actually outputted the file for entropy as well, so that you will see how, I think by mistake I pasted entropy first, but you can output the file for entropy and you will see how the split is made. So if you already have the thing, just change from Gini to entropy. You will get the, so entropy or information gain is the same thing. So you'll get the output for this. So that will be really useful. So the key parameters to note, key parameters are minimum number of samples for each node. This defines the number of samples which are required in each node to be considered for splitting. So if at all, so you remember this parameter here, which we actually pass, minimum number of. So if at all there is a split where it doesn't match the criteria that 5 samples are at least present in it, then it won't do it. So that's why you provide the minimum number of samples. Again, this why do we do this? We use this to control overfitting. Higher values prevent the model from learning relationships which might cause high specific to one particular sample. So overfitting, two things: depth of the tree, that's pruning, and then minimum samples per node. Both of these are used for uh, uh, overfitting. But at the same time, if you decrease it so small, then you will basically go into underfitting. So again, remember the bias variance trade-off. You shouldn't underfit the data, you shouldn't overfit the data. There's a sweet spot at which your algorithm will work the best. So minimum, there are other parameters, minimum samples for terminal node, depth of the tree. Again, this will particularly used for underfitting and overfitting problem. So as a thumb rule, we should check up to like 40% of the total number of features are supposed to be used. So someone was asking me, how do I determine the depth of the tree, right? So the tree is a binary tree, so you can actually do a reverse engineering calculation of how many features you have and how much depth of the tree you should use. If you use a higher depth, it might lead to overfitting problems. So then comes the decision of pruning, right? Pruning is so you don't completely grow your decision tree. You trim the nodes of the decision tree from a bottom-up fashion. So this will generally. So how do you do that? You replace the whole subtree with a leaf node. So in this case, where you see this thing here. Let's say if I want to prune this section, right? I have values which are 91 is one class and 1 is another class. So I just don't divide them further. I just stop it here. Or in this case, I just stop it here. So it is pretty much, it has done a good job of like segregating it into two data spaces, but you don't want to like overlearn the data, so you prune it at this step. So
Anna, you can only prune it if if the mode between the C0 and C1 is below a certain threshold or is above a certain threshold.
if the mode between, no, there's no thing like that. Generally, if you use Gini index to actually create your prune, you can see that it's pretty homogeneous in this case, right? So this is
Right.
91 belong to one sample and 1 belongs to another sample.
Yeah. So in this case, we could prune it right here because 91 minus 1, it's 90. So that difference is huge. So we don't need to split.
We don't need to go it further. Yeah. So this level is, so you can just do minimum depth of 2 and still you get a good results.
Right.
Good enough.
But for something like this very leftmost one, this 142 to 102, it's pretty close. So like you might want to prune it, or you might want to grow it.
You might want to grow it further.
Okay.
Right. You might want to grow it further to an extent. Even this one. So it depends, right? So that's why I calculated the training accuracy. If the training accuracy goes to like 90% or 95%, that means you are learning your data really well. Everyone understands what training accuracy is, right? So if you're using the training data itself to predict, so you actually fit the model using training, but not everything even in training is fit 100%, right? As I've shown you in that in this example here, if it is 100%, then you're fitting something like this. So, but if you actually do this, it means your training also will have some error. So it's good to have some training error because it'll bias off. It'll take care of the test error. It'll reduce the test error a bit. But that's the reason why we have training accuracy. Ideally, if you fit the models really well, your training accuracy will be 0 because you fit it to such an extent where it learns all the training samples and classifies them as to really, accurate in an accurate manner. So problems with decision trees, right? So again, like they actually, it's a very serious problem with the number of classes increases. Like we still will do a voting, but then it's very difficult to take care of pruning, overfitting, and let's say if we have 30 classes or 40 classes and we don't have enough features to define, so we cannot create decision trees then. And also if the data is like if the data is mingled, right? If there's no clear decision boundary, then also it's difficult to actually create a decision tree. So that's why it's very important to visualize some features before you decide which algorithm you want to go with. And then error propagation. So if one of the decision labels is wrong, no matter how much you go further, it'll keep on propagating that error. Like one example of that is not error as such, but you can see that if in this case where it's 142 and 102, you see even if you split it further, it still is not going to make it homogeneous because there's obviously this is the best it found there. So even this is trying to make it as homogeneous as possible, but it is not. So sometimes it's difficult. It'll propagate the error if you split at the wrong decision, wrong node. That thing, even it'll propagate further to its leaf nodes and stuff. So in summaries, decision trees can be used to predict. So again, if you want to do regression, you can use decision trees. It's very easy to understand, very easy to code up. But the main thing is they might suffer from like main thing you need to keep in mind is overfitting, error propagation. These are the two things which are one of some of the main problems in decision trees. So I think for today I just had this decision trees. So I'm actually thinking whether to do neural networks in the next class, or there's this concept of bagging and boosting, AdaBoost and XGBoost. Thinking maybe I'll do boosting next class and then do neural networks. But again, I think I have to bring this up. When do you guys want to learn R? Do you think you want to learn R now, or do you want to finish off all the algorithms in Python and then learn R? Any preferences?
Would it
Okay.
just be like the basic of ours, like what you taught us the first few classes in Python?
Yeah, we'll start from the basics.
Okay.
So we will start with how to install R Studio and what are basic data types in R. So R is basically like 1.5 lecture.
Okay.
So because the thing is, right, R also has these packages and stuff. So in data science, both of them are being used. So some people are hardcore Python programmers, but most of them in colleges and like even like I think most of the research stuff they use R. Because it's gaining a lot of. R is exclusively for machine learning. Python you can still write web services and a lot of other things, but R is like gaining a lot of popularity in data science as such. So we'll start with the basics. So there's no prerequisite for learning. So we will start with like how to, like again, variables, functions and stuff. So it's a good two classes on R. And then so there 20% of the case studies like logistic regression and linear regression case studies. I'll do it in R. So one of them will predict I think the number of bicycles a New York store should store for the next day, and what are the parameters we need to take into account, like weather features and like density populations and stuff like that. So do you guys want to do that now, or do you want to do that in like a couple of weeks? I'll tell you what are left, right? So what is left is basically we'll do neural networks and a little bit on deep learning and TensorFlow. And then basically we have this thing, naive Bayes, one more algorithm, and we have gradient descent, stochastic descent, uh, boosting techniques and bagging techniques. And then we have logistic regression, linear regression, and basically coding them up in R. So these are the things which are left. So it's your choice. If you want to start with R, I can start with R the next class, but or else if you still want to like finish off the Python once completely and then do R, I can do that also. And after I do R, I'll show you how to write an R web service so that you can write all this code on your cloud account, and you can write a client to send your data to the cloud. It'll basically classify the information for you and give it to you back.
If everyone's okay, could you do R in the end? I mean, I'm just suggesting, but I'm okay with anything.
Okay, I'll do R in the end then, because once you go to R and then come back to Python again, maybe it might be confusing this thing, right? So okay, I'll keep R. The last 3 lectures will be R, and actually last 3.5 to 4 lectures I'll put it for R and this thing. So next class, let's do gradient descent and boosting if we can finish. Then we'll do neural networks will be like another 1.5 classes. So I'll show you how to write TensorFlow also. Like so TensorFlow is this Google tool which actually enables you to like do deep learning in it. So I'll show that as well. All right, then I think R I'll postpone it to like towards the end of the class, like last 3 classes I'll do R and regressions and stuff. That's all I had for today. Any questions?
So one question, I mean, it's not related to what you did today, but how popular is Octave?
Octave, it's gaining. It depends on the teams actually. So nowadays, it is gaining popularity, but not like it's again specific to like some teams which want to use it. But
But
the
it's similar to MATLib, right? Octave.
kind of, but we don't use much of Octave stuff uh, right now. But it's again not sorry. It's similar to this thing, right? MATLAB.
MATLAB, yeah.
Yeah, not Matplotlib is this
No,
library.
MATLAB, that's right.
Yeah, so it's again like gaining popularity. Like it's specific to some teams, but it's not everyone is basically. So Python and these things are the main ones which people are using. But I know like a lot of teams, like some teams actually go ahead and use Octave as as a means to do.
The
But
reason I asked was I was just going through this course of about machine learning on by Andrew Ng.
okay,
So that guy uses Octave. I mean, he uses either he asks us to either do it in Octave or Matplotlib. Sorry, MATLib.
MATLAB.
MATLAB. Sorry, yeah,
So
MATLAB.
MATLAB and Octave, I think they are is are they free?
Octave is free.
Yeah,
So
then
MATLAB.
MATLAB is not free, right? MATLAB actually has a lot of. It's very expensive to download license. It's like
Yeah,
$2,000 or something.
yeah. So MATLAB for that course is free, as in like there is some expiration or something like
Yeah,
that.
but like most of the things in work we don't use.
Okay.
Especially like I don't know, I can't talk of other companies, but especially like in Microsoft and stuff, we use mainly Python and R. We don't depend on third-party softwares because one will have the liberty to scale. Like now, cloud, like there's Azure ML and stuff, right? Uh, which is actually being popular.
Okay.
So they have integration with Python and R. So
Okay.
I don't know much about Octave, but yeah, it's a fun thing to learn, I guess.
No, the
Anyway,
thing is, so he is going with Octave or MATLAB,
because
and
that will remove all the other portions out, right? Because MATLAB and all these have these really good libraries. MATLAB is something which they teach a lot in like college. Like I use MATLAB quite a bit for computer vision and stuff. But when I came to the industry, I don't see a lot of people using MATLAB. It's just for like research purposes. You can determine algorithms, but everything else you need to like code it up in like either Python, R, C Sharp, Java, and stuff. So because they don't want to take a dependency on third party licenses and stuff, but they have like good visualization tools and they have good uh, this thing. But I mean in like at work you mostly won't use that to show, because you need to use like actual programming languages to code it up from the beginning and stuff. So that, but having said that, like yeah, it's a personal preference. They also have libraries. They ultimately the the way you implement algorithm is not
true.
that
I mean,
important.
at
But
the end of the day, you know logic and you know a bit about different libraries in different languages. Then I think you can do it. Right?
yeah, so
Because I started a course in MLM on Coursera also.
okay, so yeah, Octave is actually good for visualizations and stuff. So I've heard a lot of people uh, look at courses there. I mean, look at Octave as well. So, but yeah, I don't know much about Octave, but
Okay.
so
No,
it's
yeah, I just wanted to know from the industry perspective. From you.
industry we don't use much. Like, it's mainly college going people and stuff, but we don't use much of it.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll if you have no other questions, then I'll just send the recording and
Yeah, Sai, I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to apply for some internship positions.
Okay.
And I don't know whether it's too if it's too early or if I have to wait till end of the course.
You can. I mean, you now at least you have the understanding of you know machine learning as such as to what it does and this thing. So I think you can start applying for sure. And then like as like we'll be done in like next 2-3 weeks. To actually 3 weeks more will be done. So mostly at that point, you will have a like good enough, comfortable understanding and also hands-on experience with like data sets and like this thing. So I don't think you should wait, but because apply and then you can always schedule interviews in like 1-2 weeks, right? So they don't ask you to come tomorrow to interview.
So how do I go about, like, do you have any suggestions to go?
So do you have specific companies in mind or?
No, no, anything. I mean, I just want I mean, I want some industry experience, so I want to apply for an internship.
So basically, like Indeed and LinkedIn actually have some requirements for data analyst positions. Uh, so you can start by there, and there are like a lot of these startups coming up in the area, especially healthcare and stuff.
Okay.
So it'll be a good thing to. I would still suggest like work for a healthcare or data analytics startup before. I mean that'll be a better, like much, you know, enriching experience from a data science perspective. But you can always apply to other. The thing is like start interviewing so that you will know what questions they are asking or what is expected out of this thing. So the way I would look at it is like the companies you want to work for the most is you apply them in the end, and then other companies just for practice, if you want to do, you can go interview with them.
Okay.
So
So, like, how about companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and all? Like, how do I approach those companies? Would I look
uh,
for them in?
so sorry, one second. No, so basically we have our openings on Microsoft
Okay.
Careers.com, and there you actually, if you search like data analysts or data, just type the keyword data, you'll get all the positions which are open towards data
Okay.
analysts and stuff. So basically that would be really useful. And Amazon also, like I think on the
Yeah, I'll.
careers website, it's basically if you just type the keyword data analyst or business analyst and stuff, it'll
Okay.
be I mean you'll get the positions which are specific towards this.
Okay. So, do you think it's the market's good for like an entry level position or like an internship?
I think there is a lot of requirement right now for people who
Okay.
understand the data as such, because uh, yeah, I think next 4-5 years it will be the same way, because a lot of people want to get into this, and everyone wants to have the capability of having the AI this thing. And I'm pretty sure like a lot of companies will open up this as because as long as they have the data, right? Like
Yeah.
anything around the data is still going to last for the next 10 years.
Okay.
So like I would say keep your career around data. uh,
Okay.
Anything like either cloud storages or like don't go into like like web testing and stuff like that, because that will be outdated really soon. But
Yeah,
anything,
I'm seeing that. I am into QA and
yeah,
but
that
I'm seeing,
like
yeah.
the Selenium, I know there was a big craze for learning Selenium, the QTP and all that, but I don't think that'll last longer. uh, but yeah, there anything around the data, like either cloud big data storages, or anything with data processing, that is going to be there for the next 10 years at least.
Okay.
So I think it's a good start to this thing. And yeah, uh, yeah, don't worry about the demand. It's going to be there, because that's where everything is moving towards. And it's also like pay wise also it's pretty I mean I think it's relatively better pay than like QA analysts and stuff like that. So
No, my base, some of the things is like, you know, without references or without proper channel, you won't be able to get into most of the things, because even if we apply with the right, skill sets, they usually don't even look at your resume. They just reject it outright. So that was one thing. I'll probably.
Yeah, let's take it offline. I mean, we'll maybe I
Yeah,
can
yeah, sorry. Yeah.
like after this like this thing. I mean, maybe we can like maybe next weekend or something. We can just talk about it, like how you can like apply or something, like where you can apply and how
Yeah.
do you go about applying.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thanks. Sorry for
sure. No
any
worries.
other thing. I guess this was just a little.
No, that's okay. That's we'll definitely talk about
Okay.
this
Yeah.
thing. Okay. All right
Okay.
then.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll yeah, no problem. I'll see you guys Sunday.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.